With that, I'd like to turn the time over to Ryan Bott, and welcome.
Thank you, Dave. All right, by show of hands, who came here today because of the Adobe building? All right, admit it. On the count of three, can we just give them a big thank you? We're going to say thank you, Adobe. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Adobe. All right. They were extremely generous in this, in letting us host this here, and I'm super excited. So my name's Ryan Bott, and I am the general manager of the Salt Lake office for a company called Gild. I spent my last 4 years at Fusion.io, helping that take off, and then 4 years before that at Landesk Software. And honestly, I haven't seen anything quite like this. We didn't do a whole lot of advertising. We had a couple emails, but this was a word-of-mouth event, and we had 130 or so registered. And several CTOs, right? So some really some high-powered people in this room wanting to talk about this topic, and I can't really recognize that, everyone, but they're here, right? And so I encourage you to get to know who they are and chat with them afterwards. We were yesterday. We invited a bunch of people from our San Francisco office out from Gild here, and we were taking advantage of one of Utah's best-known assets, right? And that was the snow. And we were skiing up at the canyons, having a wonderful day. And I looked at our own company, and we're expanding, right? So we chose Salt Lake City as a place to put all of our sales and customer success. But it kind of hit me. I thought, why not more of our development, right? What about the other assets in Utah, which is our tech scene? And if you kind of look at it, this is what we're here to talk about today. And I'll just do a quick intro. Behind every event are sponsors, right? So I just want to take the time to thank two sponsors. One is Dojo Dev Camp. And what they are building is a platform where you can learn, where you can increase development skills, right? And the other one is Gild, and founded in 2012, San Francisco, and they're listening to over 10 million real-time conversations and coding projects online every day and trying to make sense of those, right? So they're making sense of all of the conversation to discover who the innovators are. That's enough about the sponsors. I woke up last week and I opened the Deseret News, and there's a woman named Celia Baker, if anyone follows her, and she had written several articles about education in Utah. Anyone get the chance to read this article? I'll let her know. Right? I'm just kidding. She ended up writing a wonderful article about the state of software development. It was very timely. I tried to get her here. She was booked. But this graph shows what's happening. And by 2020, there are going to be 1.4 million computing jobs. But the challenge is we're only graduating in the CS departments right now, 400,000 students, right? And so the questions that we want to answer today is, how is Utah positioned? What is the current state of development? And what does the real-time data suggest about the Utah community? What is the responsibility in improving your current team skills, right? How do we attract the kind of talent needed? So what we have is two wonderful guest speakers. I'm going to introduce them both, and then they'll take the stage. And then we have a panel, and I'll introduce the people on the panel when we get to that point. So first, let me introduce Dr. Vivienne Ming. So Dr. Vivienne Ming is a PhD in psychology and theoretical neuroscience from Carnegie Mellon. She's currently works at Berkeley as well. She's human behavioral analytics and neuropsychology. She's passionate for education reform and has worked with the United States government as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So she's been working on some wonderful data analysis. And without further ado, I'll turn the time over to her, and then we'll follow that with Vance Checketts from EMC. Dr. Ming.
Thank you. Do I need the clicker there? All right, so the first thing I need to do is say that they asked me to talk about sort of what is the state of development and innovation in Utah. which I will be frank, wasn't something I felt expert in right at the moment that I was asked to do it. But we've got some really interesting data at Gild, from the Department of Labor, and a lot of other sources that we pulled in. I'll talk about it a little bit. And I had the opportunity to do some really cool analyses. And some of these things I was quite surprised to discover. Having said that, I've been traveling a lot recently, so I'm going to show off some truly horrific slides. So please be gentle with me that normally I go out and I'd bust the D3JS and we'd have cool animations going here, but one-off talk that I put together on several plane lives recently. So let's focus on the discovery and not on the presentation. So what is developing in Utah? So let me tell you a little bit about the data and where we get it from. So as Ryan alluded to, Gild is a company that collects a massive amount of data, particularly about developers. We inevitably pick up a lot of other data, much like I think, as I understand it, those buildings over there do. But what we really focus on is actual code, actual Q&A between developers, tweets, lanyard. We look at talks. We want to understand what's going on in the developer community, who the developers are, and actually build, in the case of our database, a database of 8 million people, where we can go to every single employer and say, you should hire this person because, and really provide an insightful answer. It's less about just sort of blind data aggregation and more about applying intelligence to the system. So what do we do with that intelligence? Well, we pull data off about 100 different websites. Some, like GitHub, are very developer related. Some, like some Japanese manga sites, are not, but turn out to be strangely predictive of coder ability. I find that both disturbing and like, I'm not going to really go into why it might be. But, you know, we go further than that. We look at text analysis of people's tweets and of the question and answers on Stack Overflow. Because it turns out upvotes on Stack Overflow, some of you may have discovered, are sometimes not very insightful about who's a great developer. But looking at who's answering whose questions, looking at what people are actually saying in those responses, that's really insightful. So I'm going to draw on some of this data today to give some insight into development in Utah and some comparison to other states, other regions of the country. And so what we do for our product, and I mention only because it's going to be in some of the slides, is we produce some ratings. Some of those are ratings of how expert we think someone is, the sort of skill level that they evidence in their code and their questions and in other sources. And another is something different. It's demand. Demand's an interesting concept. We kind of want to be in demand, but sometimes there's a real misconnect between the demand of the marketplace for you and your actual ability. And what Gild's really interested is finding those incredibly talented people that are not in demand. And I thought one of the interesting things I could talk about here today is, how does that reflect in Utah? What actually, you know, this isn't necessarily the first place everyone thinks of when you think startup or developer. Does that mean that there's any talent here? Does that mean that the demand is low? We're going to dive into that. So that's it for going into the who's and whys of Gild, except to say that I'm here because I want to be a part of something that actually changes people's lives and gets people jobs that they would never have gotten before. And this is one of the opportunities I've had to actually do that in a way that has had a tangible impact. I know people that have work that would never have gotten it but for our assessment of their abilities. So let's dive on in. How does Utah compare? Let's just start with some context. Where in other slides I'll have some more locations. Like I said, these slides are just horrible, awful. But nonetheless, just straight up population in thousands. Utah is obviously not huge. I mean, the Bay Area alone is vastly more developers. This is combined information from our own internal sources and the Department of Labor and the Utah Department of something that involves the word labor. But Utah is second in the nation behind Washington in terms of the percent of the population, the workforce population, that are part of that developer scene, computer scientists, web developers, software developers. That actually took me by surprise. I had no idea. I mean, I have a sense that there's a lot of work that gets done here, but I hadn't appreciated that in terms of total workforce, this is just about the top place in the country to go look for talented developers by percent. So I say we go through and we look at expertise. Well, it turns out based on our ratings of developer expertise, Utah is actually pretty well represented, very comparable to your neighbor to the east, very comparable to a major metropolitan region. San Francisco has a little bias, but it has a bit of a PR advantage at that high and very high end. But Utah really compares well to the rest of the nation in terms of the level of expertise evidenced by the people here. So what about demand? Well, one thing is I'm going to call out the Bay Area. That demand score where we say exceptional, these are people that have crazy credentials. Your chance of being able to hire them away from whatever they're doing is very low, is kind of what this story is telling you. But when we compare that against our actual estimate of expertise, that looks way out of whack. There seems to be in the Bay Area some sense that the best of the best are here, and it's way different than the rest of the country, but that doesn't really map on to our actual estimate of people's real talent. I think you might call that there a bit of a PR play for San Francisco. So when you sort of take that out and look back at it, you see, again, Utah really compares well against these other major regions of the country in terms of its, it's very comparable. You do see a little bit of a bias towards having a certain level of credentialing. By that I mean you go to a certain school, you have worked at certain companies. We don't want to take a risk. We want to hire someone that we can be confident in. But clearly very comparable to the rest of the country. So this is a little different, and it's going to, some of my formatting's different, but it's going to take a little bit of explanation. So what happens when we dive into all of those tweets? When we looked at people's LinkedIn bios? When we analyze the content of people's talks? Well, it turns out we can do some really cool things using tools I've built for other purposes. Just as an analysis for here today, I looked at what people said about themselves and how it reflects along two dimensions. One is a culture. What's the culture of innovation and development in a variety of metropolitan regions around the United States? And secondly, what is the personality being evidenced by all of these people? In our case, we have something like 18,000 developers represented in our database in the Utah area that we could geolocate. And all of these regions we have on the order of tens or more, many tens of thousands of developers. What we find is some interesting results. One is this idea of a developer-driven culture. You certainly see a kind of, not strictly East Coast, but West Coast, but there's definitely a bias towards being a very developer-driven culture in certain places. So San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Portland, Austin, Boston, Seattle, all have this quality that the way developers present themselves, particularly when you look at our self-descriptions on LinkedIn, it's very much this philosophy of, I'm driving the company. Your company is lucky. You hired me, and I'm going to do amazing art, and you're going to benefit. On the other side, we have, and I originally did this analysis for DC, for the White House, we have companies that are very driven by management. Now, this isn't a good or bad dimension. This is just saying that when people describe themselves there, what they say is, I execute. I am given instructions, and I do amazing work carrying that out. But they end up being very different cultural models. And as it turns out, cultural models that often don't fit well. So there aren't sort of big gaps there in between one group and another. And then the other dimension is this personality dimension. So it turns out what really drives a successful employee, and I think this includes developers as well, it's certainly true with students, is people that feel a personal ownership of what they do. Now, this isn't the same as the cultural dimension. This is saying, I feel responsible for my work. I gotta get it done. I'm not doing it because I want kudos. I'm doing it because I'm active. I want to go out there and do more than I've been asked for. And then at the other end, we found a very passive personality, someone who's sort of taking the world as it comes to them, but also is focused more on how people are perceiving them. And it's really cool that we can actually take this text out of all these social sites and turn it into some interesting meaning, first by doing a textual analysis, and then by passing it through some psychological models. And what we find here, and I'll start with what really kind of surprised me, is way up on the driven end of things is Utah, Salt Lake City, sort of a collective analysis from our database. And, way down near the bottom, DC and Kansas City. But turns out Salt Lake was second only to the Seattle area in terms of what was spit out by this metric. You have a big driven population here. It's a population that is driven to perform, as indicated by the self-descriptions, for their management, but feels a personal investment in that. They take it seriously and they execute on it. Which, I don't know what I would have thought before I began the analysis, but it jumped out at me as something that was quite surprising. Way more than New York City or Chicago, which has a thriving tech scene. You have a really driven population. And I think that's something that's probably overlooked, I would imagine, by many people, at least in the popular culture. So where does Utah shine? Where do you really stand out? Well, I just pulled out one thing. I think that's impressive, and anyone that's thinking about where they're going to locate a portion of their company should really take that into account, particularly large companies that really want a management-driven culture. This is the standout. But beyond that, this is an incredibly hideous slide. But nonetheless, the potential gap. So this is a metric that I have cooked up over recent months, and it looks at the difference between how developers are valued, this idea of demand out in the marketplace, and actual ability expressed. And first, what's interesting is 3 completely different places, Colorado, the Bay Area, and Washington, D.C., have a virtual identical score. Not particularly high. It sort of suggests they're really doing a decent job, or at least an equitable job, in recognizing the talent in their space. So there isn't a lot of, I think there is a lot of undiscovered talent, but what's interesting is that regardless of where we're looking, once we control for population size, all of these regions are doing about the same job of recognizing and exploiting talent in their communities. Here's Utah, just off the scale by comparison. So what does this mean? I know that this is a horrible abstract slide. What it means is there is a ton of talent in Utah that isn't recognized by the traditional culture, that isn't getting courted by Google and Microsoft, isn't trying to get poached by Amazon. These are people that my data says are excellent developers, but aren't getting recognized for it by the broader national market for developers. So combine that with the huge, the personality metrics we saw before, and that really surprising deep representation of developers in the greater Utah area. And Utah really strikes me as a place that remains untapped. I mean, even here in the Adobe building and with the spooky NSA behind us and so forth, this is clearly a community that isn't at its peak yet. There's so much more that could be done here. And yeah, that means someday you too will have Google buses and people picketing because the rents have gone through the roof. Okay, so what's up here? Oh, don't forget. So I didn't even have a chance to put this slide together for real, but we took some analysis. We looked at a bunch of trends that we're picking up on GitHub and Stack Overflow and other sites. And I just thought, hey, let's look at some, it's not obscure to you guys, but to most people, some obscure languages, some more popular than others, Angular, Julia, and Scala. And just see, these are really, Angular's in production, but Scala and Gild, I don't know if anyone's using those outside of just toying around with them. But they're hot. They're you hang around on Hacker News, you see an unreasonably large number of posts about all three of these. So who's driving this? Well, as you might imagine, there's a lot of drivers in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of drivers in New York City. But it turns out, looking at regions back with the at all of the states and the data I could collect on them. And again, I apologize that I don't have a cool statistics slide to show you. But Utah was number 8 on that region list. People here were driving some of these hot trending topics. And if I look back 5 years ago, that wasn't true. There weren't people pushing the envelope. So, 5 years ago when certain languages were just getting popular, I'm not going to pretend like I know what they are, but if we look at whether people were really looking at Django 5 years ago or people really looking at earlier versions of some web frameworks, you didn't see that push coming from Utah. But nowadays, a lot of what's trending in this is people getting involved in Q&A and Stack Overflow. And from our database of 8 million developers, there's a real push coming out of Utah, really saying, hey, what's the cutting edge and what can we do with this? All right, where can Utah grow? All right, weird, horrible formatting. I apologize. Empower your developers. This is my own personal take, but I've done some research for a number of big companies whose philosophy is we want to stay up and competitive in the future. And I do think, although it might appeal to many employers to have a very management-driven culture, I do think if you're looking at innovation and you're looking at national rankings of innovation centers, that correlates highly with this culture dimension. And that sense that your employees are really the drivers behind innovation and success inside your company. It's something that certain regions, not exclusively in the West, but certain regions have really been able to make the most of and push forward. And I think clearly Utah could move in that direction as well. Expand your STEM workforce. Again, wasn't able to put together a great slide here, but it's simple. We are always looking for new people. We're looking for great and talented developers. The solution from Forward US is let's expand our pool of workers from around the world, and I think that's a great solution. But the simple truth is we've got talent here, talent that really isn't getting tapped. Let's take, for example, in the Bay Area, there's about 30,000 female developers, which is roughly 20% of the total workforce population there, which is hardly great, nothing to brag about. But if we look at the similar stats for Utah and adjust for population, it's about 16% of the population. So even if all we do is push up the say, female developer population to match that of the Bay Area, you'd be increasing the size of your talent pool by 8%. And if you did it at the graduation rates of the CS department from the University of Utah, you'd be pushing that up to closer to 30%. So a 30% increase in the developer population. I think every employer would love to see that. And all it takes is to make certain that all of the people graduating with appropriate degrees are actually sticking with the workforce and contributing meaningfully. And it's a personal passion of mine, so I thought I'd pass along to you guys that there's something that could be expanded upon here. So it's a little mucky in here, but as I indicated before, I think Utah could probably do a little bit better in being a little bit less credential driven. I find in my research with Gild that for every really high demand developer, every really talented person who's actually good, right? Person who comes in with a bachelor's in computer science from MIT, a person that's worked for 5 years at Microsoft or Google, turns out there's 10 to 100 times as many people that are just as good, just as talented. Our analysis of their performance, their skill set, suggests they can get the job done just as well, but they don't happen to have those credentials. That's a huge loss if you're too credential driven. And I think that Utah and most regions of the country can really improve on this. All right, the takeaway. So let me start in the green, where I think, I see, the orange. So I don't think Utah's, from my analysis, is just some source of commodity engineers. It's not a place for companies to come in and drop a factory dev shop and just get stuff out of here. There is clearly real talent here, and an impressive talent pool. And it's something that I think the country as a whole, as we get more and more hungry for talent, is going to recognize. And it's a very innovation-driven community of developers, as indicated by your social lives online, by GitHub, by Stack Overflow, by tweets. Maybe that isn't fully recognized in the company culture here, but it's true in the population. And finally, once you control for some regional differences, you're actually really well represented. One big hindrance that the East Coast has, and it's a part, I think, of this developer-driven versus company-driven quality, is people get locked down. They sign contracts that say you can't do open source, you can't share on Stack Overflow. But you know what? You don't want to reinvent the wheel. You want to be able to collaborate and share. I mean, it doesn't mean giving away IP, but it means being able to learn from your peers, being able to contribute back to them. And despite some of the other findings, it turns out Utah is really well represented there as well. This is a place that can grow and change and push innovation forward, I think, nationally, whereas right now it's perceived as a place that's a follower, and it just isn't true. So where they could be better, Utah's not as elitist as San Francisco and Boston and New York, where you look at, in all of those cases, you see those really distorted figures where we have all of these people whose demand scores are through the roof, and quite frankly, their talent doesn't back it up. So I call that sort of elitism. But still in the lower ranges, we're seeing equality where Utah still remains kind of sensitive. You gotta have the right degree, you gotta come from the right places. There are great developers out there. And what matters is that they're good at their job, not that they have some piece of paper that backs it up. And I think it's possible to get away from those pieces of paper. And as I said, I think we can increase the talent pool. I can look out at the audience and I see a certain talent pool represented here, and it's pretty well reflected in the data that I have. It doesn't make Utah that much different from the rest of the country, let's be frank, but some very small advances, I think, can have a big impact. And I can't imagine any region of the country that wouldn't love to see a talent pool increase of 30% that can change the opportunities for CTOs to actually build out huge teams from local populations. It's not going to change the trend towards needing to bring people in from the outside, but we can make a difference. And I think, quite frankly, this is probably the end of the takeaway. So I just wanted to summarize. I would never have thought to do an analysis of Utah and think about, what's driving development? Where does innovation come from? I've done this by looking at the financial sector versus telecoms versus tech, and these companies that want to be thinking how should they plan for their development teams for next 15 years. I feel like after seeing the data I saw here, even though there's definitely room for Utah to grow, that one of the things they probably ought to think about is what Ryan was talking about, which is this actually looks like one of the truly untapped regions of the country. And needless to say, given how much I pay in rent, one which has some nice appeal to it. And I got to ski yesterday, which I haven't done in 15 years. So thank you so much for taking your time and suffering through my atrocious slides. But this was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot of surprising things about all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Ming. I checked the code on the formatting, and it was actually QA's fault. So, all right, let me introduce Vance Checkett. So many of you know Vance. He was the CEO at Mozy, and under his leadership, they exceeded expectations for growth and delivery. When EMC bought Mozy, he's been able to grow that significantly. He's passionate about the outdoors, right? He's over here laughing. I hope I'm getting this right. His family and helping improve the world, and he's got his MBA from none other than BYU, right? So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Vance Checkett.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. So I'm the local talking head. It's great to follow Vivienne. She's fantastic. And I learned quite a few things about Utah, listening to you speak. But I'm going to speak, I think, more like one of you, because I think just probably about everybody else is local, right? And I'm, a local technology person, although I do have a bachelor's degree in English literature and a master's degree in business. So I'm not credentialed enough to speak to the gory details, but the other panelists that are with me today certainly have those credentials. But I am going to talk about a few things that I, gave this kind of interesting title to: Software, Hardware, Utah, and the Singularity. And since this was a software crowd, I think, and the topic is software, I thought it would be really interesting to talk first about kind of software versus hardware and my take on the difference between the two of those things. It's so fascinating to see what's happening with software right now. And seems like there's this constant play between, software, the new hardware, is hardware the new software, and, what's like, where's the money really at? And, so much of everything that we do, I think, is tied to software. It's hard to argue. I mean, software-defined networking, software-defined storage. I work for EMC Corporation, which, if you haven't heard of Gild before, you may not have heard of EMC before either. We're just a $23 billion company, but nobody really knows about EMC because it's the back-end storage system behind, so much of the cloud that's out there. And yet, if you look at the jobs that we're hiring for, we are hiring for, so we make billions of dollars off of hardware, and yet we're hiring way more software developers and software engineers because our storage now is software-defined storage. And VMware, who's part of the federation with EMC and RSA and a couple of other companies, Pivotal, they've acquired Nicira recently, which is software-defined networking. And together, this federation of companies with EMC is building software-defined data centers like several other cool startups that are out there. So when you think about, software and hardware, the lines are starting to blur. But hardware is so cool, especially when you can wear it. And I am going to one-up you, Vivienne. I apologize, I didn't mention this earlier, but she's got the Google Glass on. I've got the Google Cornea. It's alpha right now, but it's actually working pretty good. And I'm joking, but probably not so much. I mean, you think about where this technology is going. I mean, it's a glass today. Why couldn't it be a contact lens tomorrow? And why couldn't it be a cornea transplant, after that? I mean, hardware is so cool. And all these autonomous things that we do. 2 weeks ago, I went to the VEX robotics competition at Davis High School up in Kaysville. And we really like VEX. EMC really likes VEX, and we've been donating a lot of robotics kits to local schools because it's a much more affordable program than something like FIRST Robotics, and a lot more sophisticated than Lego stuff. But it was so awesome to see these kids building these. I mean, one of the kids was 11 years old, and he was competing with all these other high school students, and he was just amazing with this robot. And to see him go autonomous, at different stages of the competition was just fascinating to me. I just really loved it. And when you think about taking that, miniaturizing it, and flying it around in the air, I mean, there's just, again, some really cool technology out there in the hardware space. And if you haven't looked at the projects that are going on at Accelerator, you should definitely check those out too. There's lots of cool hardware tech there. So I would say, as far as the singularity is concerned, hardware singularity is really kind of here. I mean, we are really, really close to it. And when you think about the stuff that we put into our bodies, it may not all be, super high tech and enabled with data, but you think about the medical technology that we exist, and we have a lot of that cool technology in our state today. We're doing cool things, bringing biology and technology together from a hardware perspective. So I think the hardware singularity is kind of here. But at the end of the day, for me, software wins. And the reason for that, I think, is because the software controls the hardware. And it always will, until maybe that day of ultimate singularity when... I think software singularity is yet to come, but maybe that's the ultimate day when we really have, embedded in our brains and, all throughout our bodies, and it's our brains and our brain waves that are really truly controlling the hardware. So maybe we won't need software at some point because we'll use our own. But it really is fascinating when you think about how these technologies are coming together with biology and physiology, and there's still a lot of room to go in both of them. But for me, the software is the thing that's always going to win the day. So here are just a few examples of software companies and other tech companies. And I apologize that I didn't represent all of the companies that are here in the room that are Utah tech companies. But if you look at companies that are like headquartered in Utah that are mostly software companies. I think, is anybody from Ancestry here? I should have had Ancestry up there. Instructure, my Instructure friends here? Sorry, Instructure could be there too. So I may have missed a few, but there are not a lot to pick from when you think about software companies that have headquarters and their primary operations here in the state of Utah. Now, that said, there's a lot of other companies that are growing and expanding their operations in Utah. EMC being one of them. Adobe, we're here in one of them. eBay actually has some super cool stuff they're doing, not just in software engineering. Anyone from eBay here, by the way? I actually toured the eBay data center recently and saw their cool new Bloom fuel cells. It's so amazing that the latest expansion in their data center has no UPS system, no batteries, no flywheels, no nothing. The primary source of energy is off the grid, Rocky Mountain Power, Pacific Corp, and the secondary power source is all through the Bloom fuel cells. Really cool. So lots of cool companies, but why don't more of them have operations here? And I guess Vivienne answered that question, right? Because even for her herself, she was like, wow, I didn't know. Who would have ever known unless you really dug into the data? Of course, we all know that. We all know that Utah's a great place for tech companies. So what are we going to do about it? What do we need to do about it? And there's really just kind of two big buckets for me about what we need to do collectively. And that is, the first one is curiosity. And if you've been watching any of the TV or the news, maybe you catch my little play on this phrase of curiosity unleashed. Has anyone seen that tagline yet? Well, you're going to see it. The governor and quite a few other companies, tech companies, I Am Flash, just up the road, and Merit Medical, and lots of others have gotten together with the Governor's Office of Economic Development and the STEM Action Center, and have really identified STEM as a key enabler for our future as a state, and certainly for us as technology companies. And they've created a campaign that's targeted at young children and their parents to try and get them to understand the power of STEM and the importance of starting kids early. It's almost too late by the time we get to, I'd love to go into the U of U, CS department and say, hey, can we just turn the needle? But it's way too late at that point. It was too late for me when I had my first tech job at WordPerfect, and I was at BYU, and I was like, I just can't flip the bit that fast. I didn't make it into technology until after college. But we have to get young kids curious about the world that they live in. And speaking of the Google Glass, I mentioned this to Vivienne earlier. I have a daughter, Vivienne, as well. And I was explaining the Google Glass to her last night. And it all came because I was telling her about, I'm speaking tomorrow with this woman named Vivienne, and I pulled up a picture and you had your Google Glass on, and she said, what's that? And we had this conversation about technology, and she was so excited. And she wanted to know things about it that I didn't know. So I'm just showing her YouTube videos of reviews and iJustine, and I don't know who it was. And actually, I shut off the iJustine one quickly but the curiosity in her, just getting exposed to the picture, and then the concept of the Google Glass was just mind-opening for her. And we need to do more of that with our kids. I feel bad. I've got kids and I work in technology. I'm not doing enough with my own children, and we all need to do more. So this campaign about Curiosity Unleashed, that's the kind of the sub slogan. It says STEM Utah, Curiosity Unleashed, and there's these great spots. One of them shows a young girl who started getting interested in science in school, and everybody called her a geek, and now she's one of the scientists at Merit Medical and talks about her great career. I Am Flash is another spot, and then there's some more generic spots. Go look for those and talk about those with, if you don't have kids, that's fine. Go to the local elementary school, the local high school, and help promote STEM and get kids curious about technology and the world that they live in. Because she probably will be on stage with the Google Cornea or something like that. The second topic that I wanted to address is that of diversity, and Vivienne did a great job. We didn't coordinate this at all, but talking about diversity, and I mean diversity on a lot of levels. There certainly is a gender diversity, opportunity for us that we can certainly move the needle on, but there's lots of other diversity too that I think we need in the state of Utah. I was really impressed actually to see how well we ranked with things like Julia and Angular and some of these other new languages and new technology platforms. But guess what? We're still living largely in a platform 2 and 3 world, right? If you think about our technology evolution and the waves of computing that are going through, platform 3 is kind of like the old mainframe era. Platform 2 is client server and kind of mostly the world that we live in. And platform, did I get it wrong? Did I say platform 1 is the old stuff, 2 is the stuff we're now, and 3 is the future of the Googles and the Amazons and so on and so forth. So we are still living in that platform one environment for the most part. And EMC, we still have tons of customers who are trying to get off their mainframe systems. And it's so hard because we can't find developers and engineers who can help them move their stuff. We just can't do it. We have these huge groups of people that we call it the application modernization team. And they just go in as we move data off these old systems, and then we write or rewrite applications, or sometimes we even wrap them, around these crazy old legacy environments that no one dare touch. Now, I'm not saying we should go to our kids and tell them to learn COBOL or anything like that, but we do need to recognize that there's a very diverse set of technologies, and we can't all go be iOS developers. We don't want our kids to all go be iOS developers or Android or anything else. We need to have diversity. And especially coming from my perspective at EMC, we need people who understand how the cloud works on the back end. We need to help people understand, where does the data sit? Who's securing that data? And I don't just mean from hackers, but I mean from drive failures, and I mean from natural disasters and all these other things. And so many people get caught up in the excitement of the next, programming language, that they forget where the majority of the world's technology is today. And it's this platform 2 space that we live in now. And we can't ignore that. And there are lots of jobs in that space today. And how much better if you know one of those languages or one of those technologies, and you're also taking a class at Dojo Dev Camp on Python or Ruby on Rails or something else like that. I mean, that would be ideal. So for me, we've all got to remember that the world that we live in is very diverse, and the skills that we need are very diverse. The technology is very diverse. We can't just have a bunch of front-end developers. We need people who can develop the mid-tier and at the lowest level, all the way down to, did I say it, the hardware. And this last point is also really interesting too, because a lot of people know how to develop and create really cool things, and then it blows up as soon as you get 100 users, 1,000 users. How many people on the Canvas network for the Instructure people? 10 million. So try creating an app that's going to support 10 million people. And a lot of people think, oh yeah, no problem. But how many engineers are there at Instructure? So about 40 engineers. So it's more than a 1 or 2 person shop. And Google, I think, did a really great job, like they do with a lot of things, publishing and publicizing, the role that they call the site reliability engineer. If any of you are familiar with that, I think that's a really fascinating concept that we're going to see more and more of in the high-tech job space, because we need people like Google site reliability engineers who know not only how to write code and fix code, but make sure that code runs at scale. And those are very different skill sets. And historically, it was hard to find somebody who could do both. You could kind of find a great engineer, and then you could find like a great sysadmin and a data center operator. And when things broke, you kind of sent it back over the wall. Well, when you're running the New York Stock Exchange, in your cloud environment, or you can't throw it back over the wall and wait for somebody to fix it. It's got to be fixed immediately, and it can't even go down, right? I mean, the New York Stock Exchange just doesn't go down, and that's why they're so super, super careful and paranoid about what they do. So we won't put you on the spot and ask if Instructure ever goes down, but I'm sure you're highly resilient and very reliable too. But it's a challenge, and developing in that kind of environment is really, really challenging, and that's part of our challenge today, is finding people who know how to do not only software development, but software development at scale, at web scale. And this is my last slide. I really think that there's a ton of demand here in the state of Utah for all these kinds of jobs. I think it's our opportunity to lose. So many of the, we call them open requisitions, like lots of big companies that come through, that I see are kind of global. Like, we could hire the people here if we could find the people. And what we typically end up doing is training people ourselves. We have the mini Dojo Dev Camp inside of EMC, right? Because we can't find all the people that we need with the right skills. And so we just bring them in and we train them. And that's okay, but it's not the best way to do it. So the jobs are there. I mean, we're evidence of the fact that, this building is evidence of the fact that the jobs are here. And there's more that can come here if we just all do our part to help make our kids in the schools curious, and we push the envelope for ourselves in terms of expanding our knowledge and our skills into these other more diverse areas, and help get other people into technology. So thank you very much. And let's go do the panel.
Thank you. Have a seat, Vance. Dr. Ming. Some really great points, and I hope what you're thinking, I hope some things are coming to mind, right? Because we're going to have a chance to ask questions of our panel here. So let me introduce the other members of our panel. So Justin Ball, this is really interesting. We discovered Justin. I say discovered him. He's well known in what he does, but we personally discovered him at Gild because if you look at you can actually pull up profiles in Gild, and there's 17,000 in Utah. And Justin actually, on a demand and an expertise curve, comes up as number one. So the number one ranking, Mr. Justin Ball, I want to have him come up. He's the CTO of Atomic Jolt, and he works on breakthrough projects, Ruby and JavaScript. And my interaction so far with him is he's brilliant at being a leader as a CTO, but he's also really good at coding. So welcome, Mr. Justin Ball. Let me introduce Mr. Scott Schlegel. Scott is one of the early members at LinkedIn, right? So he's got some really unique perspective about the Bay Area versus Utah. I want to ask him questions about that. And he is now the VP of Engineering at OC Tanner. And he's also worked at Adobe, Yahoo, and consultant for various startups. So Scott, come on up. Give him a round of applause. He was wondering if you were going to cheer for him or applause, and I'm glad they applauded for you. All right, and finally, let me introduce Mr. Michael Zaro, and he is the CEO of Dojo Dev Camp. They're accelerating the training courses for aspiring developers. He's also on the board of several tech companies here in Utah. So welcome, Mr. Michael Zaro. So let's do this. Maybe we'll have 3 mics up here and kind of pass those around to each other. Can I get any volunteers in the back? Maybe Lane. Can you come grab a mic and we'll pass that around? Anyone else? And Brian, if you two could just kind of help me. So let's hand 2 mics to them and we'll pass around 3 up here. So we'll have audience questions here in just a minute. Yeah, thank you. All right, well, thank you very much for spending some time with us. I've got a couple questions to start, if you don't mind. So my first question is Vivienne brought up something about Utah has, according to your data, we are well ranked in being driven, right? What does that mean to you as technology leaders here? Scott, maybe we'll start with you. What is it about this culture that you see matching that data that we're driven? Here, let's, push all these to on. Let's see, twist it. There we go.
My experience with Utah, I've been in this state for about 3 years. And I came straight from LinkedIn. I worked there for about 6 years. And I went to work for the LDS Church in the Family Search Division. And I knew that when I was going to come to Utah, coming from where I was coming, that I thought that I should have low expectations just to be prepared with it. I wasn't really prepared for Utah plus nonprofit plus religious plus Family Search. And that's not negative on Family Search because it's a great place to work and I had a lot of fun there. But what was unique to me about it was like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone was gone. And that drove me nuts because I want to show up to work at 10:30 or 11 and I want to work till 6 or 7. But the driven part of it was I couldn't get over how early people showed up to work here. 6, 7 a.m., 8 a.m. It made me nuts. When I got over that, what I finally realized is people work really, really, really hard here, and they're really dedicated to what they're doing. But it's in a better balance than I experienced in the Bay Area, where like the volunteer efforts that I did in the Bay Area, I go meet with other adults who were my own age, and they're doing work while they're doing something else, or it just never turns off. And here, Utah has it really has a better work-life balance. I don't know how to say it another way.
No, good. Justin, what would you add to that?
As far as being driven, I think that there's a certain culture within the state of Utah, and it has to do with the history of the state, that encourages sort of independent thinking and the notion that in order to succeed, I have to work hard. There's nobody who's going to take my hand and do things for me. So I think that between sort of, I guess the elephant in the room is the LDS Church is very, very prevalent in the state, and they drive people crazy in a sense to work really hard. I mean, that's what they're taught to do. And I think that sort of percolates even outside of that culture. So that would be my guess as to why Utah is as driven as it is people, if they don't work hard, I shouldn't say this, they don't get temple recommends, because then they're not honest, right? They're told to go, just take that out of the video. But they're told to work hard, and so they take that very seriously because there's a great deal of guilt that comes along with not doing that.
Okay, fair enough. While we're on that topic, I'm going to hand the microphone back to you. Tell us a little bit about what you've done, and I want to preface that with, where is the innovation occurring? You've done some interesting projects, and then I'll ask the rest of the panel to chime in. But if I could ask the question, where is innovation truly occurring here from what you see?
Sure. So within the state of Utah, I've been a Ruby developer for a lot of years. I was a Python developer before that. I was a .NET developer before that. Long ago, I was an electrical engineer, so I've kind of gone the whole gamut from, when you talk about a full stack developer, I've written assembly code all the way up to JavaScript, and UIs and everything else. So a long time ago, I stopped doing hardware because it was very expensive, and moved into the software world because that's where a lot of the innovation happened over the past decade, really. And now I see that sort of swinging back, and I think that Vance mentioned this in his talk. I think that this year we'll see a great number of wearable devices. I think that the Internet of Things is finally coming to fruition. We're seeing a lot of chipsets coming from places like TI that operate using the super low power Bluetooth that can run off a CR2032 for an entire year, which is really incredible. That's why you see things like the Tile. I just saw Apple advertising a basketball that has sensors. Have you seen this? The 94. Nobody plays ball probably, but it's a $300 basketball, so I don't know if I'll be buying my kid one. But it has sensors in it, and it hooks up to an application on your iPhone, so whenever you throw it or dribble it, it gives you feedback. So I think that over the course of 2014, we'll begin to see more innovations around the Google Glasses. We'll see more of the Fitbit type stuff. I'm a cyclist, so I just bought a Garmin 510. It hooks into my iPhone, so not only does it record the power coming off of my bike while I'm riding and my location, it'll also give me the weather and whatever other data it can pull off the phone. So in terms of truly innovative ideas, I think that hardware merged with software will become an incredible space to be in. If you were going to do a startup, then I would look at I don't know if you mentioned this, the Hackcelerators. There are several of those that just showed up in Shenzhen, China. So you go over there and you say, here's the hardware that I want to build, and they walk downstairs and make it for you. And then it's a really incredible experience. So, here in the state of Utah, we have Boom Startup. That's like the big accelerator for the state. And there's about 2,000 of these accelerators around the world. And if you're really interested and you want to go start a company and you have some brilliant idea for, I don't know, whatever the next basketball with sensors in it is, you can go move to China and start up your company and do some pretty incredible things. So I would say that's probably one of the big innovations. And then when we talk about STEM, especially the STEM initiatives in the state, if you follow any of the maker movement, I think that's another big deal. We've started a maker club up in Cache Valley. So I have 3 daughters, and I want them to be involved in technology. I don't want them to feel like it's a male-dominated. I mean, if they sat up here, they would think it's a male-dominated space. But I think that we have a chance to really provide technology as a first language to our youth. And so the maker clubs and similar initiatives from the state will also become a big deal.
Thank you.
I have a follow-on point to that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I almost want to disagree with you. Like from a Utah perspective, like I look at where innovation is, and I really don't feel like it's coming from our corporations. I don't feel like it's coming from the companies that we're starting. There's a huge swath of startups all in this area that are very much Me Too companies. They're doing something that somebody else is doing. They're going to try to do it a little bit better. They're going to try to innovate on it. They're going to try to push it a little bit further. Where we're really, really good at, though, is our developers, and it's shown in the statistics that just showed that they're very, very driven. And innovation is happening in the individual developers, but I don't think we've gotten a way where we've connected those with business people that can really come up with truly innovative ideas. We just haven't got there yet. 2 cents.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Scott. So how do we do that? How do we connect the good developers? Maybe Michael could take a stab. Scott, you go first. I want to hear your comments because
I was going to say we need to get rid of all the MBAs in the state.
And there's an applause.
Ryan, don't you have an MBA?
Scott, no comment. Arizona State, though. Come on. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of business people here. Michael, what would you say to that?
So I think there's a couple things. We talked about innovation, and I can't remember. I think Vance was talking about innovation and education. And part of that's the way that we consume education. So instead of going to a 4-year degree, or maybe in addition to a 4-year degree, you have other types of training, whether it's going online to a Udacity, or taking a course from Harvard or MIT through Coursera, or going to a boot camp like ours. There's lots of different ways that you can gain the skills that you need for your startup, for your employer, or just so that you're more well-rounded. But I think beyond the way we consume it, it's the types of people. Before this event, we were chatting just a little bit outside, and I realized one of the things that I think will change over the next few years is, in the past, we've just hired developers. You need lots of web developers or software developers or whatever part you're working on. I think as we go forward, you will hire technologists, or you will hire a salesperson who can code, or a marketing person who understands technology. So it will be less that's the one person in the room who knows how to talk to computers. And it will be, in order to be a functioning member of a functioning professional, you'll need to know how to use technology to advance what you're doing. Right? We're bringing it into schools. The entire STEM Action Center is trying to find ways to help our students learn earlier, help them be more creative. And so instead of just having a developer, whether they're man or woman or wherever they come from, you'll have people merging different industries and different skill sets. I think that type of innovation will help bring someone who I love education. With my development skills, I can do something bigger and better. I like children, I like sports, I like fill in the blank. With technology, you can add more to it than just bringing an MBA on the team.
Okay. So on that note, tell me, what is a company's role? Maybe Vance, take an answer here. What is EMC's role in advancing your software and hardware engineers to that next level?
Well, the first thing that we've been able to do is we have found a lot of people. We have trained them. So we have 750 evangelists, I think, now in the state that are really, really promoting to their friends, to their family, technology, and they have good jobs. So that's the first thing I think that at least the big companies can do, is provide great jobs for people to allow them a platform to continue to promote technology here in the state. Parents are going to talk to their kids about STEM a lot more if they've got a job and it's a good paying job, and even better if it's a tech job. So I feel good about what we're doing from that perspective. I think the other, Adobe's doing a great service, I think, right here, just allowing us to be here in their building. And there's lots of ways for big companies to give back into the local communities. I think it's as important as having, Innovation Hour or Innovation Day. It's just as important to have Community Hour and Community Day. And it's sometimes easier to do that in a big company than it is in a really small startup company. So the role of the startup for me is kind of different. They're going to go hopefully create some value that will, turn into a bigger company someday. But once you're a bigger company, I think there's a bit of a corporate and social responsibility that I think we're doing a good job. I think Adobe and IM Flash and some of the other big tech companies are doing a good job.
Okay. Scott, OC Tanner, what's the role that you have in training current developers, right? So I would imagine there's a shortfall in certain languages. I'd love to understand where you see that, and what does OC Tanner do?
What is OC Tanner doing to get out of?
What does OC Tanner do to invest in current employees to make sure that they have the latest skill set?
So for the most part, like our primary mechanism for encouraging developers to continue to grow is to really get the crap out of their way. We've all worked at, raise your hand if you're a brilliant developer. Every one of you, right? The rest of you are too embarrassed to admit it. We spend an awful lot of time going out and we spend lunch and we work with recruiters and we try to find brilliant people to come in and to solve the tasks or to solve the problems that we put in front of them. Now, if we tell them to sit in the chair and do it the way that I told you to do it, that ruins 99% of their creative potential. So from a problem-solving perspective, if I can do a better job as management outlining what the problem is, you can go figure out some brilliant way to solve it. And I don't really care how you solve it. Our company doesn't care. So much as if we can articulate what the real problem is, then you can use your collective wisdom and experience from your previous jobs, from what you read on the internet, through finding out new technologies. And the learning process can really be a part or baked into the development process. We can send you to a conference and you'll probably just come back with a hangover. Great, that's one set of experience, but we'd rather have you do something else that was more productive.
Justin, what would you add to that in terms of, I think the idea I'm trying to get at is skill set investment from you into the people that work for you. And one other question I'll throw in is, do you see investment in your own employees as a way for them just to go get another good job at your competitor, right? In 2 years, you invest all this time, and there is a sense out there. I go out and I'm going to send someone and I'm going to put them through one of the code camps and get them to know JavaScript and Angular. And now they're just that much more appealing to my competitor, right?
So that's a really good question, because we've sent a couple of people to Instructure. so we trained them. But that's okay. Our process of training new employees is just simply pair programming. So we give our employees the problems. We say, you solve them however you'd like. And then we use an apprenticeship model and walk through step by step and help them, pair them with senior developers. So then our junior developers get the experiences from the senior developers. And I think that's probably the most effective learning experience that we can give to our junior developers. So then that leaves, what do we do for our senior developers? And basically giving free time and giving a lot of leeway, a lot of latitude. So one of our developers is volunteering to help with the aquarium over here. So we encourage our developers, wherever possible, to contribute open source code, because that opportunity, that experience of working with other developers outside of our company and contributing to open source code not only helps them become better developers, but it also helps them build reputation. Clearly, places like Gild are out there surfing GitHub, scanning and seeing what people are doing. So we want and we encourage our developers to become better, to build their reputation. Whether or not that leads them to another job, that's their choice. We hopefully can create an environment within our company where they want to stay. That's how we keep them. We don't keep you by making you less intelligent. We want you to be the most intelligent developer you can possibly be.
Yeah. Okay. So good. So what I'm hearing is investment. I love the idea of open source. There's been an explosion in that over the last 5 years, obviously, but I'm going to hand the mic to Vivienne, Scott, and I'd love to kind of understand from you two. Give me the real sense, right? You're both Bay Area natives. Give me the real sense, Utah versus the Bay. I mean, so do we have the kinds of skills, right? I think we saw some of the data. Do we have the kinds of skills? Can we innovate as fast, right, as what's happening out there?
So the first thing I can say is I think everyone can see that I'm shivering. And one of the differences between the Bay Area and Utah is that I'm very cold.
Someone give her a
but that also affords me the ability to go skiing. So what did the data say to me? I mean, I can't say that much about. Thank you.
Yes, wow. Bombarded with jackets. How chivalrous.
Oh, yes. Oh, wow. Life is good.
Someone take a picture of this, please.
So what did the data tell me? Since I can speak to the Bay Area, but I obviously can't speak as an expert about Utah outside of the data. Well, it tells me that you have a curious developer population. You have people that are actually interested in pushing things forward. But there is a bit of a disconnect with I think, probably a byproduct of this perception of Utah as a great place to drop a sort of an industry factory shop and just have people churn out code. And, we're going to leave innovation somewhere else. Well, clearly that's a misunderstanding of the potential of this community. When you look at two stats, that potential gap, which is the difference between the real ability of the community and what's being recognized, and how enormous it was for Utah versus the rest of the country, and then combine that with the drive and the fact that there's some real innovators at least reaching out to the social community to learn and to share. This suggests that, and I agree with you, that if you really want to see innovation and you want to see people with an understanding of what's possible driving forward the possible, then I think you can tap into that. There were other regions that I analyzed where, like DC, where I'm guessing this is being driven by sort of defense industry contractor types. People were very happy just executing on what they took a lot of pride in executing on the instructions they were given. There's a lot more potential here for innovation in Utah. And I personally strongly agree that when you look, for example, research we've done at Gild that furthers research that was done internally at Google, what's really predictive of success inside an innovative company is, sorry if I get geeky here, but it's endogenous drive. It's you care about what you're working on. You're not doing it because you're going to get a promotion. You're not doing it because you want to up your value for the next offer. You're doing it because you care about what you're doing. The truth is, if you don't have that, an Ivy League degree is a negative predictor of your contribution to your employer. So you combine the statistics we found about Utah with the known drivers of innovation and excellence. And I think the only real question is what is it going to take to shake up the culture a little bit and get that shift moving?
Scott, shoot straight with this, Mr. Bay.
So we have a fairly large population of hipsters, so we're pretty good there.
Okay.
We're short. I would say that we're short two things in competing with the Bay Area if we're talking about direct competition. Like one, an investment perspective, and I don't mean specifically just the funds that are available, because I think that there's a lot of people who are willing to invest in technology here, but from a connection perspective. Meaning I've worked with a whole bunch of other startups that are in your area that can be partners to help your business grow from A to B to C and on to different rounds of success. We just don't have a Sandhill Road equivalent in Utah at all. And those folks don't like to travel south of Mountain View, so we're totally screwed. Then the second thing that I really think that we're missing, and probably going to offend a lot of people with this one, so be careful with me here, but is great as BYU and U of U is, like Stanford and Berkeley are turning out more entrepreneurial minded, more brilliant students that are more current with their technology directions, more on top of trends and where the earth is going in terms of consumer businesses and business to business, B2B and B2C enterprises. We're lacking in that area. Sorry.
Anyone here from higher ed? We invited a couple universities. This is, I'm going to hand the mic to Michael. I want to go back to this. Let's see. I mean, Michael, when I saw this statistic, right, it speaks to exactly what Scott said, which is Utah is not putting out in the education system a lot of technologists. I mean, hardly any. So if you read the article, we are fourth to last in our education system. The only states that were worse than us were Montana, Wyoming, Mississippi. Right? So we are fourth to last in what we're putting out in our education system. And yet this is where the jobs are. So somehow there's a disconnect. Obviously, you guys have found a gap, but talk to me about the disconnect between what you're seeing in the education system, even in our higher ed.
So this won't necessarily be Utah specific, but one of the things that we see computer science related, you see these really low numbers for who counts computer science towards your high school graduation, different things. One of the problems is the few computer science classes that do exist aren't fun. They don't make it enjoyable. They further the stereotype that it's nerdy and geeky and weird. And so one of the things that we've done is kind of a way of giving back. We want to continue to do more and more of this. Is we're working with the Alpine School District, a couple of charter schools, in teaching more engaging ways of learning about technology. So there's a class where we teaching in about 3 weeks, where instead of learning about a great language like Java or C++, but something that is much deeper than they need to learn on their very first time learning to program, we'll work with them with HTML. We'll build a game online. So when they go home, they don't say, "Hey, Mom, look, I built a database." Say, "Hey, Mom, look, I built a game." The example, the one we're actually going to be teaching about is a 12-year-old girl says she wants to be a developer but doesn't know what that means or how to do it. So she came and talked to us and said, "Can I take your class?" I was like, "Well, you should probably keep going to school, but here's how I'll help you be involved." Her little brother has a peanut allergy. He's 4 years old and doesn't always know to say no when an adult gives him something with peanuts in it. And so she wanted to find a fun way of helping him learn better what foods he should and shouldn't eat. So we talked a little bit. We have a game that we'll actually be doing in the Dojo Dev Camp as well as the high school students, where food falls from the ceiling and they pull it one direction or the other, pull it either into the trash can or into the happy little kid's mouth. There's some animations and some funness. So you can have these little 4 to 6-year-olds go online and play a game. That's much more entertaining, obviously, for the kids to play. But for the people that build it, if that's your first experience with technology, with development, that's much funner. That's much better to show off. That's a sexier product, right? You don't have to say, "Look, I have an admin system. Hey, look, I've found a way of parsing emails more effectively." Nobody wants to hear about that, and that doesn't make you brag to your friends and take the next class and get better and better as you go through school. So making it more engaging, I think, would be a huge thing. And that can happen through companies like ours, through big companies, volunteering, Microsoft teaching a couple of classes. There's lots of things that companies can do to get more involved and make technology fun.
Vance.
Is Aaron from Newmont still here? Or Jason, sorry. Did he leave? Are you with Newmont? I wish he was still here. Do you guys know Newmont University?
Sure.
I think that's another really cool, interesting thing that we could do a lot more of in the state. And what's weird is that all the students who go to Newmont University, which churns out more CS grads than like the top 10 schools in the whole state of California in a single year, and they're really well trained for work. All the students are from out of state. They're not even Utah residents. And so they're coming here to Utah to go to Newmont University to learn how to be engineers, and then they're leaving. I mean, it's really kind of a bizarre thing. But dev camps, Newmont University, I think there are lots of good little things going that we just need to get behind and push a lot more.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Any other comments on that? Yeah, let's open it up now. So just make sure the on button's on. We've got 15 minutes left, so we'll just open it up. Questions from the audience.
Okay, so I think Vivienne hit on this with the papered credentials, and I think eventually the data will really push this way because higher ed has been broken for a long time, and now with this technology ramp, it's just making it clear how broken it is. So one example, classes are boring, linear algebra teachers, they're not applied. What a boring topic if it's not applied. And then the other issue is with this technology ramp, the universities can't keep up because they have like a 3 to 5 year feedback cycle. So how on earth are you going to get a new grad that's sprinting with a Hadoop stack on random forest or Julia or these new languages? So the question I have for you, I have 2 questions. So will higher ed be able to fix itself, or will it die off into these hack alternatives that I think are fantastic? Or the second question I have is will EMC, OC Tanner, IM Flash, in these companies here in Utah, will they ever pay an uncredentialed developer senior salaries out of the gate? Because so.
Good question.
Was that for me or for Michael?
Let's start with Vivienne first.
About it.
And let's start with Vivienne, I think was the first part, and then Vance chime in.
Sure. So yeah, there's a couple of questions in there. One is that I'm a huge advocate of purpose-driven education. So that could be really focusing on education around concepts instead of classes and degrees, but tying it to a goal that the student can really connect with. To me, differential equations course was memorize a whole bunch of solution forms. And they'll say, hey, when you get to grad school, we'll explain where these come from. It turns out they don't, even then. But then I became a computational neuroscientist. And suddenly there was a purpose, there was a meaning to that. And it completely transformed my connection with that material. So I think you're very much right that, and you're right, I think game creation is a great educational experience because, which is a little different than educational gaming, which is a different concept. Game creation, it's purpose-driven. You want to make this thing. You don't want to go home and say to your mom or your friends, I made a CRM. You want to say, I made this cool game and you play it with me. I made this Android app and you shoot and you blow things up. And yeah, the game itself's not educational, but what you had to learn to make it happen and how that motivates a kid to do it is pretty powerful. For me, even at 42 years old, I'm making a system to monitor my son's diabetes. I loathe JavaScript. I hate it with a passion. But I've really had to dig in and learn that because I want a slick, really data-driven experience just for me. It was purpose-driven. So then the other one is, do I think it's going to change? Do I think companies are going to change? And I think they're going to have to. Not necessarily because we're going to force them, but because innovative companies are already doing it. And where innovators lead, other people have to follow or they get left behind. So I'm not going to name any names, but there are companies that we're working with that are really thinking, where should we be 15 years from now? And part of it is, what should our company culture be? What should our skill set be? And how are we going to actually figure out in the broad population who's going to be ready for that? Well, 15 years from now, that's not even going to be the same set of languages. You need to train meta skills, how people solve these problems in a broad sense. And I think those are going to come in a more bite-sized educational format where the foundations are meta, but the skill sets come from places like this.
Thanks, Vivienne. Vance.
I got to say something about this too, because in defense of the big companies, I think it's a good stereotype to say that we look for credentials, but that's not the kind of the rule. Credentials are an easy thing to look for, and I think, and Vivienne's data showed, we care a lot about credentials because it's easy, and you can litter your resume or your online profile with a bunch of acronyms. But at the end of the day, we are an at-will employer, and we will hire you and we will fire you if you can't perform the job that you represented. So I wish we did more coding competitions and things like that, and coding challenges before we brought people in. I think that's a great thing, or using a lot of heuristics that, companies like Gild represent. But I would love to try and clear up that stereotype and say that it's not just about the credentials, even for the big companies. As to the point of education and can we fix it, I don't know. Frankly, I would really love us to fix public education, but it kind of doesn't matter. I think it's going to exist forever to some degree, but all these other little educational avenues are popping up. These massive, open online courses, and there's this kind of emerging store. It's like the Amazon of education, right? And I don't know, can you take courses on Amazon? I don't know, but you probably can real soon, right? So that is coming, and that's going to be really, really powerful. And I think the leading universities are already promoting some of that and getting behind and pushing some of those big open courseware kinds of initiatives. So I think that's going to happen. This bite-sized education, degrees that get mixed and matched from 16 different universities, and yet you still get the credential.
Half my team's uncredentialed. I love college dropouts. If you're a dropout looking for work, come talk to me. Now, I will say this, hiring college dropouts, I've had great experience with it, but if you go too low down that scale where they dropped out their first or their second year, they want to show up to work at 4 and stay up all night. They're like living college during my employment with them, and it hit or miss. Our salaries are very competitive as well, like 80 to 150,000.
You can see why the stereotype exists, right, Vance? I mean, if I ask these developers here who would apply to Google, the stereotype is I'm not, because I didn't go to Stanford, and I probably already have 3 times, and they've called me for 3 different jobs, and they've all told me no. So I'm tired of hearing no from Google because I didn't have the background that they wanted, right? And you can see that happening. And so it's good to see that the change is occurring, albeit I guess it varies by region too.
So I'll throw one note on that. Just one example is not indicative of the whole industry, but a good friend of mine worked at a number of startups here, including one of mine, and then had built a side product called Banterly, just a kind of fun toy project to test out some new technologies. Someone at Pinterest picked up on that, thought it was cool, and reached out to him and said, "Hey, that's really slick. Want to talk to you about it. What are you doing right now?" And talked him out of working with me some more, and then stole him over at Pinterest. He was one of the first 10 employees there. That, your degree or the credentials that you have, to Vance's point, it's really easy to be able to pull that through. And if you're hiring dozens and dozens or hundreds of developers, you can't possibly sort through portfolios or the projects that individuals have built at that scale. And so they have to have some metric to look at least to give them an indication. But if you have a portfolio, at a dev camp or on your own, if you've just, even for Guy and I own a company called Verisage, a software development company. When we hire people in college, it's not because of what they learned in college. We hire them because most of the time they grew up, their mom or dad had a company, and so they were hacking away on stuff, learning when they were teenagers. They learned because they were passionate about it. And so they have something interesting to show for it. It's not because they sat through CS 140 or 120 and heard a brilliant teacher explain something that changed their life. That happens, but it's much more common that we hire people that are passionate about technology, and they can learn what they need to in any number of ways, either on the job or through bite-sized education, in any form.
Yeah, no, it's good to see the changes. The resume is dead for those recruiters in the room. We see it happening in tech all the time. It's replaced by GitHub. It's replaced by Stack Overflow. Those are the places where the innovation is happening. And so, anyway, what other questions do we have? Go ahead.
This is an open question to the panel. I think we do have a great entrepreneurial spirit in Utah. However, I'm not so sure that the funding is actually all that entrepreneurial. They want to see a team and a product, a long ways down the road with the, shown market traction, et cetera. My question is, do you feel like our developers actually match that in terms of entrepreneurial spirit? It's a fairly conservative culture, and I've got X number of kids, and I've got I can't really afford to jump off. I've heard I'm going to get paid in equity, and I've heard that before, kind of thing. So I'd like you to maybe address that.
Yeah, maybe Justin, you've sold a couple companies. Vance, I'd love your opinion.
So I totally agree. The financial situation in the state of Utah is rather difficult because we just went through this with a startup that I had that we're kind of winding down. They typically want 20 to 30% of your company for $50,000 to $100,000, which is really tough to take, at an angel stage. And then if you go for a Series A or a Series B, you're just not going to find a VC firm that can handle the big investment here in the state. I know Instructure was very successful getting funding, but they went outside of state to do it. And Josh Coates was really influential and really made that happen. And if you want to read an interesting article, go search for "Poisoning the Well" that Josh Coates wrote. And okay, I see heads nodding, and that will give you an idea of the state of the financing for startups in the state of Utah. I think that's changing a little bit. There's the Utah Angels 2. I've met Utah Angels 1. They like to play golf. I think they invested in a company. I shouldn't say this. I'm totally ruining any chance I ever have going to these guys ever. Utah Angels 2 actually looks like a serious angel fund. So they might provide kind of a catalyst for other angel groups to sort of form within the state. There's definitely the money kind of pooling here in the state now. When we see companies become really successful, like Instructure and Fusion.io, and they have IPOs, and all of a sudden you have a lot of young tech entrepreneurs who are like, I don't know what to do with my money, and they frequently invest in other companies. They want to see other people succeed. So hopefully that begins to evolve. As to the developers, I run into guys all the time. They want to start companies. There is a great deal of motivation. So maybe they go work. This is how I started my company. I went and worked a job. This is when I was young, so I could take it. I would come home and I would write code till 6 o'clock in the morning. I would sleep for an hour and I'd go back to work. I'd do that over and over. And that about killed me. But that was one of the successful e-commerce companies that I eventually sold. But again, I didn't have the funding. I had to sort of bootstrap it while working another job. If you look, there are a number of startup weekends. We just had Sundance, and they actually did Hack Dance. I don't think it was well enough publicized, but there are a lot of events. And if you are developers, I would encourage you to go to these events. Get together, spend a weekend hacking with somebody. Go to the Utah JS conference. Go to Mountain West Ruby or Mountain West JavaScript. They have a couple of these. Get to know the other developers. And inevitably, when developers know other developers, one of them is going to figure out a problem that a lot of people have. And when they do, they're going to be able to build a successful startup. If you're familiar with Steve Blank and Eric Ries and the whole lean startup movement, I think a lot of tech companies, and this maybe goes to the whole Bay Area versus Utah thing, a lot of the Bay Area startups really, they're getting out of the building, according to Steve Blank, is to go to other places in Silicon Valley and see what their needs are. In Utah, we have a different set of needs, and I think that those needs may be similar to other places in the country. So if you kind of escape the realm of development and you go out into the real world, I know I'm a developer, it's hard, I don't like to leave my office ever. If you get outside the building and talk to people, you'll find a problem that a lot of people have. And when you do that, you know you'll have a successful business. And so, yes, the culture exists. I meet these developers all the time. So I plead, if you're one of these developers, come to these things and let's start companies. I want to see lots and lots of companies start in this state.
Michael.
One thing that I learned kind of the hard way, I went to BYU. There were a lot of good things going on in the entrepreneurial department there. But I feel like one of the things that I learned about the Utah ecosystem that I didn't know beforehand, and I didn't learn at college, was we have a very specific type of successful startup here in Utah. And we don't have this breadth of successful startups like you would in the Bay Area, just because of a longer history and just greater volume. We don't do Facebook here. That doesn't happen in Utah, right? Scan's one of the very few examples of a very successful, very high volume consumer and startup. And so they didn't raise their money here because nobody would fund it. We do business to business, enterprise, SaaS. Okay, sales heavy. We're great at that. You've got lots and lots of companies, AtTask, Omniture, Domo, lots of companies in that vein. If you want to build a startup there's lots of people here that can fund it, they can give you advice, they can make connections for you. So just be aware of what kind of company you're starting, and don't be afraid to reach out to people in San Francisco, right? I know the guys at Techstars in Seattle really well because we tweeted at each other a couple of times, and I flew up and hung out with them for a weekend. It's not out of the realm of possibility, especially in other tech hubs. They want to talk to you. They want to meet you. The culture here is conservative. We have more kids, families earlier on. So if I'm 27, if the 27-year-old in San Francisco, more likely to be single and able to stay up all night and work on things. I'm married with 2 kids. so life is a little different. That's just something that we're going to have to work around. It's a culture thing, and having a work-life balance isn't bad. It's just you're going to have to moonlight longer to get to the stage where an investor is going to warrant giving you $100,000. And one last point, it don't have to go to angel groups to raise money. Talk to people that have worked at a company that just had an exit. Talk to people at HireVue or Fusion.io or any number of successful companies here. They do well enough to give you 20, 30, 50, $100,000. Okay? Especially if they're in the right industry. Talk to the founders of those companies. There's tons and tons of money here that is not organized into official angel groups that have monthly meetings. So go out, network, meet people in the industry, and to Justin's point about Eric Ries and the Lean Startup Movement, get out of the building and talk to your customers and talk to people in your industry, and you should be able to find the money that way as well.
Good.
I'd just say the money is an excuse. It's out there. You might have to work a little harder here, but the money's there.
That's a good point.
Got a question here.
Let's
Just
take,
really, I just wanted to say really quick, if you do that, if you go to people and ask for money, just be really careful, because there are a lot of laws and the SEC can crack down on you and you can go to jail. So just be aware that typically your investors are accredited investors. That means they actually have to file something with the SEC. You can still go family and friends, but just be careful, because I actually do know a guy who spent some time down here at Point of the Mountain because he took money from his neighbors and they did investing, and everybody was happy until the company went south. And he went to prison. He had a legitimate company, was making money. It's just that when the company ended up failing, they went for blood, and he went to prison. So be careful.
Good word of advice. Go ahead. Let's and then make this the last question. It's almost 6, and then
Try to be very quick. Hi, my name is Raj. I work for a Utah-based company called In Contact. First of all, thanks to all of you for your insights. I would make a comment, and probably, it'll turn into a question. Coming to your point, Justin and Michael, you mentioned, the social Utah, not many people being in Facebook versus compared to the Bay Area. So, we started something called as a IT Architect Association. The goal was pretty much to what we are talking here, to educate ourselves and excel ourselves, and also bring in developers who are aspiring to be architects, in the specific
more of software architecture as well as business architecture. So keeping the long story short, we are trying this for about 2 years now. And finally we took off. We're having our 4th chapter meeting, and we collaborated with ISA, if anyone heard about it, ISA Global, who are International Software Artists Association. So in any case, the point I was coming to, we had so much hard time networking. I see a gap of networking in Utah that it is very hard to collaborate with other groups. Today we are about 1.5 years we are trying, and today we have about 60 people, which is good. We are happy with that. People come to meetings, people are slowly getting excited about it. We talk about a lot of cool trends in IT architecture, what's coming in the next 5 to 10 years, and so on and so forth. And companies slowly started seeing value. Fidelity hosted our event. Another bigger company, financial company than Fidelity, is doing it. I don't want to give the name. But what I'm trying to get to is we need more networking. We need more groups, like maybe what you're running, Michael, and the other startups or whoever it is, to collaborate more as a community in Utah to grow together, in the technology space. So just wanted to know what
yeah, maybe Scott, right? So maybe I want Scott to give his opinion on this. So, we see this. You look on the meetup.com site in the Bay Area, and you've got a developer event, 6 of them a night, any given moment, right? But Utah, we don't have that. This event, we didn't even hardly publicize it. We had 130 sign up. It's kind of almost like it's starving for this meetup community of.
I tell you that. So it's definitely clear that Utah does not have a Salt Lake specific hacker news, right? There's no news outlets or even meetups kind of dead, to your point. That being said, I actually think there's a ton going out there, and I'd tell you this in 2 ways. First one, from a language perspective, there's the Utah there's, like we said, JS, and there's the Utah Ruby group, and there's a Utah Python group, and there's a latent Ruby group, and I heard it's 3 dudes that just get together, go to Denny's all the time.
Go Leighton.
Go Leighton, right? I think there's a lot of stuff out there. Like there's stuff for Java, there's stuff for SQL, there's a Hadoop users group that's going around. There's a lot of stuff, but it's really distributed, and you really have to look for it. And that's kind of the group side of it. The flip side of it, what's to prevent you from reaching out on LinkedIn to a whole bunch of other people that you would like to get to know in the developer community and say, hey, let's go to lunch? Like, there's a good chance that if you offered to buy anyone in this room lunch, they would probably say yes, and then you would make a new friend who would help you on your path towards learning more developers' names or finding out other people or what they're doing or benchmarking, whatever it is you're after. But the lot of us as programmers are saddled with being introverts for the most part, and that's a very difficult thing for us. So maybe get a self-help book. Dinner's a little bit much. You got to start with lunch.
And you're from In Contact, right? Yeah. Great company.
I have a mic, does work.
Doesn't have I think the reputation of some of the software companies here, but perfect example of getting the name out. I mean, In Contact's doing some amazing things, right?
I had one more question and one more statement that goes to that perfectly. The Utah community, the open community, is actually wonderful and it's huge. Open West is about to have probably 800 people in May. Utah Code Camp, which I advertise, is coming up in March, and we're planning 500. The issue we have in our community is we are not marketers. We are developers. We're developers trying to connect with other developers, and quite frankly, we don't know how to do it. I've been putting on Code Camp for 7 years, and I can tell you right now, I started with 50 people, and I still can only get about 400 or 500. Now, in 7 years, if I had a marketing expert, it would have been thousands of people. It would have made sense, but we don't have that. So for those people out there that are looking for community and they're looking for events, and I asked the panel the same thing, if you're looking for those types of things, they are absolutely here in Utah. If nothing else, take one of our flyers, take my card. I can tell you about a student conference going on for STEM right now. I can tell you about 3 startup weekends planned. I can tell you about 5 coding events just this year that are going to take place right here in Utah. So please, if you are at all interested about these events or at all passionate about developing, come see us. We'll definitely help you out.
There you go.
So come bring me your card afterwards. And thanks for putting on Code Camp. We really do enjoy that.
Thank you.
And one of the things that we've done as part of our kind of internal personal development with our engineers is we encourage them to submit talks to all of these events. So if you're in a position where you can influence the developers in your company, encourage them to go present, because that's a great opportunity to become less of an introvert. Plus, it's a great opportunity to say to the world, hey, this is what I know. And share that knowledge, and then they'll meet other developers, and it's a really wonderful experience. And the hack nights that happen, I was actually at OC Tanner last year after the Utah JS, and they had a hack night. So thanks for sponsoring that. Those are great opportunities. So yeah, I really wish that those were more broadly known amongst the developer community. But come share your card. We run the Ruby group up in Logan, so happy to evangelize all we can.
Good. Oh, good. Well, listen, I think we've tackled a lot today. What we came here to accomplish was really understanding what's happening in the state of Utah and tech development. And I want to thank each of you for coming, contributing. We're going to be here for a while. There's plenty of food, so stay. And I want to give a final round of applause to each of our panel members and speakers. So thank you very much.